What is up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday night. You probably have better things to do than to listen to us, but we really appreciate the fact that you are here. We have a very, very exciting guest, Rebecca Ramos from Long Island Against Domestic Violence. They are the not-for-profit that we chose for the month of February to donate for every sign-up we get at Redefine Fitness as a way to help give back to the community and help those that are in need. For those that may or may not know, domestic violence cases since the start of COVID have been on the rise. So this is something I feel that's really important to learn a little more about. But I don't want to do any of the talking. I want to get her to tell you all about it. So let me get her on in here. And welcome to the show, Rebecca. How's it going?
It's going well, thank you. Happy Friday.
It doesn't feel like it, but it is a Friday.
It's supposed to be a long weekend, right? That's it. But whatever, here we are.
Thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciate you taking the time out on a Friday to come talk to all of our audience and beyond on Facebook and YouTube to really tell us and teach us about what your organization does and what you guys do. So I'm not going to talk anymore. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, first off, so much for having me and us on a Friday night. So, but this is something that I'm very lucky to actually love my job. So I'm happy to talk about this on a Friday night. So I'm the community educator at an agency called LI Against Domestic Violence. So we're a nonprofit agency that serves all of Long Island, Suffolk, and Nassau. We do focus primarily on Suffolk County. That's where the bulk of our services are. But we are a domestic violence crisis center. So we help survivors of domestic violence in a variety of areas, either with direct legal advocacy. We are in every single Suffolk County police precinct. We are in the courts. We also have a short-term crisis center too for individuals who are leaving abusive relationships. We have counseling, we have a financial literacy program, and then we have the preventative program. That's where I come in, where I spend a lot of my time talking to people in the community. I often spend most of my time in high schools and in middle schools talking about how to have healthy relationships, how to identify abusive relationships, and what they can do if they know somebody who is in an abusive relationship or then themselves are in need of resources. So we have an array of services because we want to work with victims and address victims and fit the needs of victims who are in need of holistic services. You know, domestic violence doesn't just impact one aspect of a person's life. That's why we have developed services for victims to address all aspects of their life so they can get live a life free of violence.
I love that intro. Thank you for that. That was exactly what I wanted.
Good.
I'm gonna pitch to everyone watching right now, guys. If you have questions for her, she is here to answer anything you may know. I believe domestic violence people think they know about, but I really don't think they truly understand unless you've personally gone through it. So I know for some people that hits close to home, but it's definitely something. She's the resource, and I'm going to ask questions if I don't hear from anybody else, but I want to start with a kind of basic one that I think is more known now, but only has been in the last 10 years. Most people, when they hear domestic violence, they think of a man abusing a woman. That's most of the cases. Now I feel like people are starting to realize it can be the other way. And that's what I've seen. I've seen women abusing men. And then I've also seen a parent abusing a child. So can you talk a little bit about those two different out of the norm, I guess we call it, domestic violence?
Yeah, so I always say when I go into schools or if I'm working with groups, you know, when I learned about domestic violence, you know, even in high school, how I learned it is, you know, I had a teacher who threw on a Lifetime movie, and it was a story of the battered woman, right? It was a woman who was getting physically abused by her husband. Typically, it was her husband, and she took her children and ran away. And that is certainly a story of domestic violence. That's typically, you know, that was what was often most recognized. But we actually use the term, we tend to use the term, because it's a more accurate term, intimate partner violence. So how I describe domestic violence, the term domestic violence is kind of like an umbrella term. Within domestic violence, there's a variety of things. So domestic means home, right? Anything that happens in the home. So this could be violence between, it could be child abuse, it could be elder abuse, it could be spousal abuse. So two people who are either living together, it could be either the husband or wife, or if they're a same-sex partner, it could be that as well. But the more accurate term, if we're talking about abusive relationships, is intimate partner violence, because, you know, two people don't necessarily have to live together in order to be experiencing that. They could be either current or former dating partners. They could have a child in common. There could be a variety of relationships. And you're absolutely right, where most people think of the abusive man and the woman who is a victim. And, you know, that is still the overwhelming majority of cases. You know, we consider domestic violence and intimate violence a gender-based crime. But there is more awareness, and I'm glad that there is more awareness about, you know, men who are being abused as well. And this often, you know, there's a lot of stigma around men coming forward who are experiencing abuse. So the stats are usually, it's 1 in 7 men have experienced some sort of abuse by their intimate partner. But we suspect that number is a little bit on the low side because there is such a stigma about men coming forward. You know, often we'll hear from men, you know, the reason why they never came forward is because, you know, it was dismissed. It's often dismissed as, you know, she's just crazy, or, you know, why don't you just ignore them? You can handle it. It's just, it's a crazy relationship. It's a toxic relationship rather than an abusive relationship. But I think, you know, with the awareness now that abuse isn't necessarily always physical, I think there's a recognition now that, you know, just because it's not physical doesn't mean it's not abuse. So it does range, and there is a lot more nuance, and you're right. I would say the last 10 years, I think there is more awareness that it can happen in any sort of intimate partner relationship. It doesn't necessarily, a woman isn't always a victim, male also isn't always the abuser, and there are other relationships too, same-sex relationships, you know, any people who identify in any range in the gender spectrum. So it is more complicated, and it's not just one story.
Yeah, and I think even on top of that, just as a man, I feel like if I tell people, "Oh, my spouse is abusing me," they go, "Suck it up, you're a guy." I don't want to tell people because it's, you know, that's not manly.
Right. And why men often don't report, right? You know, why it's often dismissed. It's like, you know, just forget about it, like block her, or, you know, like, it's not that bad. It's not, you know, and it's often identified like as she's crazy, or like she's, you know, when in fact, if it were to happen in the reverse, we would say that, you know, that's abusive. We also know too that there is, you know, by dismissing this behavior, I would say that there's a lot of, you know, it does hurt men as well. You know, you're telling young boys who are seeing relationships like this, you know, don't cry, like, take it like a man, take it like a boy. And then you have a boy who is stuffing down all of his feelings, and it doesn't necessarily, they're emotionally underdeveloped, right? They don't necessarily know how to cope by telling them, you know, suck it up, don't be a girl, don't cry like this, you know, it's not that big of a deal. And often the trauma gets amplified, and it comes out in different ways. And it could be either through substance use, or it could be through violence too. So if we teach young boys that it's not okay to cry, stop crying, it's not a big deal, then, you know, the only outlet that is left is often, you know, it's violence is either glorified, or it can come out in other unhealthy ways.
Mike, we have here saying that even with women, it is often dismissed by law enforcement or religious counselors.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's different aspects of this. You know, so we actually, as an agency, have worked really, really, really hard to partner with law enforcement. We're actually the first agency in the country to have a a formal relationship with law enforcement. So we have a contract with Suffolk PD where we are in every single one of their police precincts, because we saw the need to, there is a necessary partnership. Oftentimes, police are the first ones to respond to everything, so if there's a landlord dispute, call the police, for everything. But when it comes to domestic violence, any police officer will say one of the two most dangerous responses or things to respond to is either a car stop, because you never know what you're going to get, or domestic violence, because you never know what you're going to get either. So it does. So we worked really, really, really hard to foster that relationship with law enforcement, so that when law enforcement, they're doing what they need to do, but with an advocate, having someone who is an expert in domestic violence, and it was addressing the issue in a holistic manner, because the criminal justice system can provide some remedies, but a person still has their entire life that has been affected by domestic violence. The legal system, yes, of course, a person will be getting justice. The point is to get justice served, and that to hold people accountable, but that doesn't always, there's one aspect, but there's still also the trauma. And what about a person having to start their life over again? And what about a person, who is looking to get to, physical safety or financial independence, or, everything in that realm when your life gets kind of turned upside down. So that's why, our advocates are there to not only help and explain the criminal justice system and kind of hold the hand of our clients and victims and survivors, but also see how we can connect with other resources and other services and other needs, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen in the criminal justice system. And I'll also just address the religious aspects. That's an obstacle that we have tried to, and we've done a pretty good job educating religious leaders, and I would say definitely more now. People are aware that there is that domestic violence. I think that's just people kind of know that it's a crime. It's not okay. That it's harmful to everyone in the family. But for a very, very long time, and I still think that there are some religious leaders who do. The core is the family, right? That's often what religion is based on, is maintaining a family. So it often can be dismissed by religious leaders. We really try hard to educate and recognize that and let people know that, yes, the family is really important, but individual safety is as well. So we worked really hard to connect with religious leaders to also do more education. And I do think that there is more awareness now, but we still have a lot of work to do.
I love that you guys are kind of expanding yourself out, and exactly who you need to partner yourself with to kind of make the best of it. And that's awesome. That says a lot just about you guys as an organization, taking those extra steps that even not-for-profits that do what you do aren't doing. So that's really, I want to talk about something you mentioned 2 or 3 times already, and I just want you to clarify what it means. You said holistic approach. So what is your holistic approach? Why don't you explain that briefly to us?
So domestic violence, oftentimes people think it's, and we know, just even the term, right, violence, people think it's physical abuse. And yes, there is physical abuse. That's often, what is most present, it's most visible. But abuse physical abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you think about, what it takes for physical abuse for a person to get and escalate to a point where they are in a physically abusive relationship, it doesn't happen right away. If you were to go out on a date with somebody and they were to physically assault you and punch you on the first date, you would never go out with them again. There is a pattern, and there is a growth that leads up to that. So often physical abuse isn't present in the beginning, but it starts to become more controlling, and a partner starts to, call excessively and kind of put rules around the relationship, or guilt them into not participating in activities and isolating them, maybe extreme jealousy. And domestic violence and intimate partner violence isn't based on physical violence. It is based on power and control. It's a pattern of power and control where one person is using abusive behavior to gain power and control in the relationship. So the most common, what we think of is physical violence, but the most, I think, that has the longest lasting impact for many survivors is the emotional abuse, the mental, emotional, psychological abuse. Being controlled by a person that you love and you care about and is supposed to be supportive, but instead they are manipulating an individual. They are gaslighting them. They are preventing them from doing things that they enjoy. They're lying. They're humiliating them. Isolation is particularly effective, especially in this time of social distancing and during the pandemic. Abusers have used the chaos and the social distancing to keep people in abusive relationships. So I bring all of that up first because domestic violence impacts all aspects of the life. It's not just physical safety. That's why, that trauma manifests itself in a lot of ways. So if an abuser is starting to become very jealous and very controlling, maybe they're not allowing the victim to work anymore. Maybe they're putting rules around how much they work. Maybe they don't allow them, they're cutting off their communication so they no longer have access to their family and their support system. And they're now financially dependent on their partner. So if they leave the abusive relationship, they do have to kind of start all over. Sometimes there's a really big gap in their resume, or they haven't worked, maybe they gave up school to be with their partner, or maybe they moved very, very far away. And often there's the fear that's still there. So a person may be separated from their partner, but after being groomed and after being told for years, in many cases, that you're not worth anything, you are the reason why my life is terrible, you're a terrible person, and that every day being told that you're being told that you are worthless and being controlled, people often have to start from the ground up. Our clients are resilient, and they often, they move us, and it's amazing, the human sparing, but also I think just after what they've been to, like their survivorship is very much there, but that's why we can't just address it in a bubble. We can't just get them we need physical safety, but there's also other things to address. There's a need for counseling. There is a need for counseling for their children because they have witnessed domestic violence. And kids who do witness domestic violence, they're more likely to either be in an abusive relationship or actually abuse. So there's a lot of risk that goes along with that. And domestic violence, again, impacts an entire life. So that's why we need to address it holistically rather than, okay, we got you into shelter and then you are living on your own, then what? What happens next? So that's why I keep saying holistic. And we take a lot of pride in that because, there's oftentimes a lot of gaps, but we worked really hard to mend those gaps.
I gotta say one thing. You are extremely knowledgeable about this. I'm just sitting here and I'm just like, wow, she knows a lot.
Something I talk about all day long. Like I really, and I'm a chatty for I can talk. We can talk all day long. Like unless we put a time limit, like I can be here forever. But yeah, it's something that I have the privilege of talking about with students most of the time, with adults, with service providers. And yes, I talk about this, but I also work directly with clients, and that informs the work that I do, that we do. It's one thing for me to read a book and learn about domestic violence that way, but to hear actual stories from survivors, that it's not just so black and white, my partner hit me, my partner didn't hit me. There's a lot that goes on underneath. And that's why people stay in abusive relationships. That's probably the most frequently asked question that I get, why do people stay in abusive relationships? It's very easy on the outside looking in to see and say, if that was me, I'd leave that relationship. Like they're toxic, like you have to get out. How many times have we seen friends who are in not healthy relationships, just leave, like get out of them. You have to break up with them. But it's not that simple. And there's a lot of things that you may not be witnessing underneath, but particularly when there is power and control, when a person has asserted their power early on, and there is a little bit of a power dynamic there, there's a mismatch, it becomes more and more difficult. But with an abuser becoming more controlling, they start to inevitably, a victim will have to depend more on their partner, even if they're abusive, because the abuser has isolated them in an array of ways.
I think I'm going to ask the question that everyone asks. And like I said, I know we have a bunch of people watching this, guys. If you have questions, put them in the comments. We'll get right to it. So I don't want to be the only one my brain's going a mile a minute right now. But so what's that point, right? So there's obviously couples and significant others that they get into little altercations, we'll call them, and then it's kind of, it's normal, healthy, like, arguments that everyone gets into. Is there like a marker you should be looking for where if I'm in a relationship and it's abusive, but I'm thinking it's just normal, what's a sign that I can look for and be like, take a step back and say, oh, okay, this is the point. Right. It's no longer good.
Right. So that's a really great question, because I think there's conflict in healthy relationships. Like, there is inevitable conflict. The difference between conflict and healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict, and then abuse. It exists on a spectrum, right? So it's unhealthy, healthy, and then abusive is often how we can see it. Now, there is something that some survivors will talk about, that there's this kind of like cycle. There's a pattern where, every relationship, if you think of, it's very exciting in the beginning. We call it like so you're really into each other. That's like the foundation, all the butterflies, all the good stuff. It's Valentine's Day. So like, think about your Valentine's Day. Like, it's the time where you think back to, and when I talk about teens, like I even think about friendships too. Like when you meet somebody, like you have that energy together, you're like, they're going to be my best friend forever. Over time, there is some tension, right? Like there is that conflict. Maybe they're starting to do things that you don't like. That's not okay. But we often, when there is that foundation there, often we will because we do care about the person, we'll make excuses, and they'll make excuses too. Ultimately, it's not bad all the time. It just, people have rough days and rough times, and maybe they overreacted. And that's where the conflict is. And usually people will talk about it. This is what happened. This is how it made me feel. And very often in an abusive relationship, that happens too. But then there's something that's big that happens. And identify it as anything that crosses your line. So this could be physical violence, right? It could be that they, they freaked out at you and they started yelling at you. Maybe it's anything that crosses your boundary where you say like, okay, this isn't okay. And this is very often where people will get in contact with us, either through the hotline or, they know that something's going on. Sometimes a person will leave the abusive relationship. But very often a person will get back into the relationship because of what we call, a reconciliation phase. So I'm so sorry. I love you so much. You're the best. I don't know what I'm going to do without you. Think about all the times that we've been together. Like, think about that beginning start. Like, we have that. Like, please don't throw this away. I promise that I'll get the help that I need. I'll do what I need to do to keep this relationship. Are you invested in this too? And of course, if you think back to your honeymoon, like, yes, I am invested in this. So there's things get good again. But then tension might start to build up. And then an explosive episode. And then a person apologizes again. And when we start to see a pattern, so I always say, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. There's mistakes, and there's unhealthy behavior, and then there's a pattern of abuse. So if you're attempting to address the situation, if you're trying to have that open communication, but you always kind of feel like you're walking on eggshells, that you never know how the person's going to react. Maybe they're getting more possessive and controlling. Maybe they have an explosive temper, and like you never know what's going to happen. Or they're putting rules around who you can speak to and who you can't. That's often a big indicator. I've had clients who, will say like, hey, that friend of yours makes me feel kind of weird. Like, I don't know, they just kind of rub me the wrong way. I think that they're trying to break up their relationship. Maybe you should spend a little bit more time or less time with them. Or why don't you hang out with me on Friday night? I know you hung out with the boys, but like, come on, hang out with me. Like, and it is every single night that every time, and if you're going out with their friends, they're freaking out, they're calling excessively. So where it starts to cross your personal boundaries, but also even when it's being addressed, it's not, there's no effort to change. And then, or they're trying to manipulate or gaslight you and say, like, that's not how it happened. You're remembering that wrong. Every time you always lie about this. Why can't you get it straight? And a person starts to question their own sanity. So how I define, so in simplest terms, it's where there's a pattern where it's not just conflict, but it's ongoing. And no matter what, you try to address it and it doesn't get addressed, or it gets worse over time. The only thing that I would say where there's, and I think most of us can identify this, is when there is some sort of physical violence. When there's physical violence, that is the line. That is, if someone is using violence towards you, that is where, sometimes, an accident for, physical violence, if somebody you care about, you don't necessarily exert physical violence unless you're trying to assert power and show that you are the dominant person in the relationship and seeking that power and control.
Very interesting. I'm learning so much.
And I always try to make it like without, it's hard topic, when people see domestic violence, they're like, kind of like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or actually
that's my next question. I already have this one lined up. I already had a big ones I wanted to ask. So as a person looking in, so someone that's not in the domestic violence situation, at what point, or is there a point, should he say, hey, I need to take charge and do something about this? This person's getting beat, or I see this is going on. They don't see it. And even though it might ruin that relationship with that person at that time, is there a point where a friend or a family member or just even a stranger, you should step in? Should you, and how should you? Yeah, you know what I'm asking. Go for it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're asking. So, I think I always go back, if you think back to your friends, right? Like maybe you're out to dinner all the time, and every time you're out to dinner, there is a friend whose phone keeps going off and they're like, I'm sorry, I really have to take this. Like, they're going to freak out if I don't take this. And you're starting to notice that there's some behavior that's like, there's some behavior that it's not okay. And it's crossing boundaries, that there's something wrong. It's not a healthy relationship. You think you're being a good friend by being like, break up with them. They don't treat you right. You deserve better. That's often what we hear. You deserve better. Like, that's not okay. And it's true. Like, a person does deserve better. Nobody deserves to be abused. But there's a lot that's going on underneath the surface that you may not know about. So the best way to address it, when you see something going on, show concern. And not necessarily for the relationship, or even concern for or suspicion of the abusive partner. One of the best things that you can do is show concern for the individual. Because if you start to show and critique and criticize the abusive partner, often a victim or a survivor, or even like ourselves, we get very defensive. We're like, wait a minute, you don't know what's going on. Because you may not know what's going on. So a person may start to close off. One of the best things that you want to do is address them. Something seems off with you. I just want to make sure that you're okay, and open up the door. Very often, very rarely will a person just kind of step in and be like, yes, thank you so much for asking. You I've been waiting for you to ask. Does it happen? Yeah, I'm sure, but usually it doesn't. And understand their hesitation. Because you may realize, and they may start to realize there's an abusive relationship, but they're like, I don't know if I want to leave. There is that tension building. There's that power and control there. And oftentimes, because they've been in that situation for so long, like, the unknown is kind of scary. Not knowing what's after the relationship is a little bit scary. But also, there could be a survivor, a victim, maybe in a relationship, because it is more dangerous to leave. Very often, one of the most dangerous points in an abusive relationship is once an individual tries to leave, because an abuser has lost their control, and they'll do anything to get it back. So when a person leaves an abusive relationship, we actually do a pretty extensive safety planning with them to make sure that they have everything in line, because we know it's a high risk time. So understand that they may be hesitant. For one, they may be in physical danger, and that's why they're still in the relationship. But two, it's uncertain. Then you want to kind of present them with some options. Saying you have to leave the relationship. No, they're not going to want to leave the relationship. But you're saying like, hey, I listened to this lady. She was on this podcast, and I was watching like live. She said there's a hotline. There's a variety of hotlines. If anyone's watching this from anywhere, the state coalition, there's a state coalition in all 50 states. But it's best to do a local organization because they are connected to resources on the ground. And most of them have 24-hour hotlines. Ours has a 24-hour hotline. So you want to connect them with that, give them options. And maybe it's not a hotline. Maybe it is, do you want me to call you? Is there a code word that you need, that I should call you at that point if something is going wrong? Give them options of how you can support them. Now, as far as your question about when a person should intervene with the individual, do you call the police? I will say that if you see somebody who is in danger, in immediate danger, looking the other way isn't the safest. You want to call the police, some sort of intervention because you want to get that person safe. But oftentimes, you may have heard stories of this, but we hear of neighbors who may experiencing, they're always fighting, breaking things. Someone's being physically abused in an apartment next door. And you may want to call the police, and that might be the right thing to do. But it's also important to consider reaching out to a person and making sure that it's safe to do so, because maybe there is something that happened in that situation that, yes, a person was in danger and they felt like they were in danger, but it may have not been an offense enough for the person to be arrested and removed from the home. So now you have you have the police that were called. You have an agitated abuser, and a victim has to stay there with the abuser. And what do? It could escalate and get worse. So this is where, you should inquire at least with the victim and say, how can I support you? Is this okay? Do you need me to do anything? And the best thing you can do is really to call a hotline, because there is specific safety planning that we can do and work with the victim that is the best circumstance for them, rather than, we want to tailor every single safety plan. But also, and when you're listening, provide a safe space, because, they're probably telling you some egregious stuff if they're deciding to open up. And it is often difficult for you to not react like, like they did what? People don't want to, they don't want advice. They want someone to listen. Offer only what you can. You may not be, there may be some social workers listening. You may not be a social worker. You may say like, this is so out of my wheelhouse. Offer only what you can. But if you generally talk about relationships, like this is something that was for a long time very taboo. No one talked about domestic violence, the battered woman. No one really spoke about it, but it was an unspoken problem. People were always experiencing abusive relationships. It wasn't just private violence. This was happening underground, and this is how battered women shelters opened. Domestic violence shelters opened because there was a network of people who knew that there was a problem that needs to be addressed, but we need to provide resources on the ground, immediate resources, and that's how they kind of got established. So, but if you talk about these things, addressing domestic violence, not being okay, or calling out abusive behavior when you see it, I think a lot of it gets normalized and it gets classified as toxic, right? We can deal with a toxic relationship, but once it becomes an abusive relationship, it's serious. When ultimately they're the same, right? There's a power dynamic there is a control that's going on, and addressing that and talking about, and even on TV and the media, I think it's hard for young people when they see these abusive or see relationships, oftentimes when they're glorified as normal, right? Like how, if we think of, the back and forth in a variety of movies, and if you even think of like Beauty and the Beast, right? If you go back to that movie, actually trying to like convert this beast who is enraged, right? And he doesn't allow her to leave the castle. And like for some reason is a romantic, like why is so addressing and challenging a lot of norms, and talking about healthy relationships and identifying that versus, being okay with it and backing off because it's too complicated.
That was a good answer.
Oh, thank you.
I think you hit every single point on there. I don't have any follow-up questions about that whatsoever.
It may have taken 6 minutes to respond. It's so easy to say, the reason why I kind of go through it is because it's so easy to say, like, to just give you like, do this X, Y, and Z. But I think it's important for people to understand why you do it. Because is so much going on underneath the surface. And again, it is so easy, like, oh, just leave the relationship, just leave. Why aren't they just leaving? And there's a lot going on. Like it is hard. If you think of just any relationship, right? Like breaking up is hard. It's uncomfortable. It's not like, especially when it's a long-term relationship, if there's kids, it's complicated. But when you add that power dynamic and when you add abusive behavior in that too, it's not only hard, but it's dangerous. And that's what we have to kind of understand, where it's not as easy as like getting out of the relationship. There's a lot going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway. It can be anything. I think that's kind of the point. Yeah, I can't look at it as such a black and white thing. There's always more under the surface and more in a relationship and how a person feels. That's why they feel trapped. And I think that's where it's important to realize that, hey, as a friend, this is what I got out of it. I can offer what I can offer, but I'm not going to overstep and give you false advice. I'd rather say, hey, call LIADV and here's the hotline number, because at least you can offer better advice than somebody else. And that person may not feel comfortable and maybe able to take it a step forward. And as a friend, say, hey, let's call together. And maybe that will help branch and bring open and let them reach out. I don't know if people really do it on their own, but I feel like as a friend, if you said, let's call together, let's go through this together, they now feel like they have support. And I think that would better the situation for them.
And a lot of people don't, we've actually got an increase in calls of people asking how they can support a loved one who is going through this. Because, it's one thing to call a hotline, but how many of us, do we really call hotlines often? It is kind of a scary thing because you don't know what's on the other end. And often we'll have people who are calling, like, what's the process for getting help? Like, one, is this going on? Like, this is going on. Am I right to be concerned? Two, what's the procedure? Like, do you have to press charges? Do you have to get the police involved? Like, what happens if I come forward and tell somebody? And we make decisions and all of our services are based on a client choice. We will never, ever force a victim to leave a relationship, to stay in a relationship. We will never do that because a client knows their experience best. They know their safety best. They know their relationship best. And who are we to say, you need to do X, Y, and Z because this is how it is and this is how we see it, and we think that you're in an abusive relationship. No, like often we'll have clients who will stay in an abusive relationship and may not leave for a long time. What our goal is to make sure that they are safe as they possibly can be in that moment, and we can hold their hand throughout the entire time. So we don't make any decisions. Like we will never force them to get an order of protection. We'll never force them to do anything. And that's what I hope people know and understand. Sometimes people just call because they want to talk. Very often people will call the first time they're not going to ask for services, but takes a long time to build a relationship with our counselors. We have full-time staff, we have a 24-hour hotline, and we've had hotline staff who have been there for years, and and clients have gotten to know them, and that's how they're able to trust us, because they know it's the same voice at the other end of the line. Like, oh, I've spoken to her before. Do you remember me? We do remember our clients. That's what
Do they have
makes
to give a
us.
name?
No, they don't. They don't.
That's something
If they,
that's good.
that would be the next step. But no, very often, we'll ask if they want to share their name. They do not have to give their name, and it's open to anyone. They could be under the age of 18. We'll talk. It's open to anyone. So, and a lot of times people will call either anonymously, not I want to know the circumstance, or a friend will call and say, I don't even want to say my name because like this is just weird. And we'll help anyone. It doesn't matter. Often we think of just in the beginning, it's a gender-based crime. It's only women who experience it, but we have serve all populations. So men, women, children, people in the LGBTQ community, immigrants, non-natives, or English speakers. We have access to Language Line, but we also have bilingual staff too. So we really work to connect with anyone and everyone and serve as many people as we can, because domestic violence doesn't discriminate against against population demographics. It affects men, women, children, immigrants, non-immigrants, people in same-sex relationships, everyone.
I love that. And just kind of to start wrapping things up a little bit, your donations that you get, I saw that on your website, people can donate. Where does that go to in brief, if you can kind of, and maybe I'll put the web address out that people can actually donate if they want it on their own.
Yeah, so we have a lot of our services. We have we get funding from grants, like many nonprofits do, but a lot of the gaps in our funding, we actually we do fundraisers, and we do that to fit in the things for grocery shopping for our shelter. We have, of course, we get a lot of donations of canned foods and non-perishable items, but we need vegetables and we need milk and regular things. So that money goes to our to groceries. They go and fund even just providing education to a classroom. $25, a $25 donation provides 1 hour of education to a classroom or for a community group. So a lot of this information does need to be, or a lot of this money is serves to our clients directly. Most of it does. It's meant to serve our client directly and provide services. We've done a lot of fundraisers over the years. We have a gala every single year. We have, Pause for a Cause. We have a ton of fundraisers, which we have been in person over the years, which we haven't been able to do because of the pandemic. So we've gotten really creative with all of our, with our virtual fundraisers, and that's why we're doing this 5K. So from the February 1st to March 15th, people can participate in a virtual 5K. So they can either do a 5K, 10K, and they can do it any way they want. If they want to do it outside, they can, at home, on a bike, crawling, whatever they want to do. They can break it up in whatever circumstance. They can do it with you. And that money and that support, those funds go to our clients. They go directly to services. We're a nonprofit agency, so every dollar counts, and we try to stretch every single dollar as much as we can. We're lucky we have funding. We have pretty mainstream funding with our grants, but there is some gaps that we do need to fill, and that's why we ask people to support us through these fundraisers.
That's awesome. And
yes, I actually see the agency too. It is the majority of our donations goes directly to direct client services, and that is either for paying for our advocates. We pay for even just services as for financial literacy courses. Our financial literacy director works directly with clients to help get clients financially independent so they can be on their own. And like I said, little things for either clients or things that we need in order to provide these services for everyone.
And Krista's putting on here, she is amazing. She helped raise a few $100s for us, actually, for breast cancer back in, when was breast cancer awareness? October?
October.
Yeah. And through Peter Pitt and Hotbog. So we'll work something out, Krista, and we'll get something set up with Rebecca and LIADV. We appreciate that.
Awesome. Yes. And we like to do, we've been doing a lot of virtual campaigns and events. And one of them is for this month is actually February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So not only is like the time for love, we also talk to young kids about dating, either violence, but also healthy relationships. So what we've been doing over the month is doing a lot of virtual activities. Every week we've had some sort of activity. The first week we actually built a bay. So like we had a cutout where like we've had people put aspects of what they want in their ideal partner. And a lot of it, some of it's about being compassionate and showing empathy. If they like pizza, things that like are must-haves. This week, we're actually doing this weekend for Valentine's Day, we're actually encouraging people to write a self-love note. So often, people may be in a relationship, but we need that own self-love too. So you can share it with us. You can tag us on social media. All of our social media handles are at liadv.org. So this could be Instagram, Facebook. We're actually on TikTok too, if you want to join us. One of the biggest things that we're doing actually is we're doing a contest for kids, for teens all over Long Island, so Suffolk and Nassau, and it's a video making competition. So teen submits a 60-second video or less. It could be either through TikTok, it could be, they can use any medium they want, but something that promotes healthy relationships, that talks about teen dating violence awareness. Kids are so super creative, and it's really cool to see the videos come in. And there's a prize. It's a $100 gift card if they submit it. So definitely join us. Oh, look, we got a self-love note. What is it? I love me, love yourself because you're worth it. Yes. Yeah. And, we need to love ourselves we have to have that relationship with ourselves in order to have healthy relationships with other people. So we're encouraging people to do it. It's an affirmation, be cute, whatever it is, you get to do your own thing.
what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to put a post up on Facebook, and we're going to just have everyone write self-love posts and have you guys tagged on there. I think that's awesome and easy for people to do. Just everyone writes self-love. That's coming in hot after this.
Yes, isn't it? Next week we're doing a fun one, like an emoji reaction. Oh, we've had like such a blast putting this up. I've been spending maybe too much time like doing my own self-love notes. So this is good. Like we're trying to encourage people to get involved in unique ways that aren't, just watching somebody talk all the time. There are ways that we can put like real life lessons, just a self-love note that's part of having healthy relationships. So all these things are meant to not only raise awareness, but also engage people as much as you can. So everyone write your self-love note, put it all over the place, share it with us.
I love it. And thank you so much for doing this with us, taking your time out. We went for almost an hour. So thank you for people hanging on. That really means a lot. And that's why I picked you guys first, because to me, this is something that needs to have more awareness to. And you had a lot of people recommend you about how great of an organization you are. So that truly goes a long way. And I hope that we can help. And hopefully we can raise more money for you. We're at 150 already. So I want to at least double that by the end of the month. And we're donating $50 for every new sign up we get at Redefine Fitness, guys, for the whole month of February. Let's do it. Get healthy. It's going to build your confidence. So you're going to be able to pick signs of abusive relationship and love yourself more, because then you have more confidence in yourself by working out, and donate to help others in domestic violence relationships. That's a win-win-win-win in my book.
It is a win-win-win-win. I am so glad that you chose us. We look to get embedded in the community as much as possible, because we want people to know that we're a resource. People are experiencing abusive relationships, and they may not know where to turn, like who is out there. We're out there. We've been out there. We want people to continue to know who we are. Even in a time of social distancing, we've never closed our doors. We've taken a lot of safety precautions, but our hotline has still been open. We've always had staff on and aware, and we've seen an increase for a need. That's why we really encourage people to donate, participate in this virtual run, if you sign up for training, like every dollar counts. It does go to direct client services. It helps support survivors on Long Island, and it helps raise awareness. So I'm so glad that you decided to choose us. There's just love all around. Talk about, Valentine's Day weekend, Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So, and a Friday night too. So what a joy.
And even if you can't donate, I think the absolutely easiest thing you can do is share this video. It literally costs nothing, and you put it out on your feed, and then somebody who needs it might see it and watch it and learn something. And it just kind of shows the more awareness you raise just by clicking a share button. If you can't donate, will go a really long way for somebody else, because they'll get to see a personal connection really build off of it. So, but thank you, Rebecca. Thank you to LIADV. That is a mouthful to say, but I love it. Long Island Against Domestic Violence. Thank you guys so much for coming on. Until next time.
Bye. Thank you.